Hi folks, the Filipina here. And in many of my previous videos, I've explained the benefits of dating a good Filipina, and we do have some amazing qualities. But today I'm going to tell you about the Filipinas you don't want to date, because it probably won't end well. And if you don't see the warning signs, you'll end up in the ditch. I know what it's like to see someone online or in person and feel inexplicably drawn to him. Someone that just seems to immediately grab your attention to the exclusion of everyone else. After seeing a photo, having a video chat, or maybe even a date or two, some of you have a tendency to focus right away on just one woman. I get that. But a lot of you just move too fast, and the Filipina in your crosshairs probably isn't even trying very hard to get away. So it might be time to slow down a little and examine the quality of the creature you're pursuing. If you're careful, and if you watch enough of my videos, you'll be able to spot the obvious red flags in time to take evasive action. But in most cases, it's the things you can't see that'll bite you in the rear. I call it the girl in the car phenomenon. You pull up next to another car and see a gorgeous woman behind the wheel. She turns her head and smiles, and all you see is perfection. Just one look at that angelic face, and you're already thinking about what pickup lines you'd use if you got the chance. Then you both pull into the same gas station and watch in horror as she pulls all 200 pounds of her incredibly well concealed butt out of the car. And you lose count of all her tattoos while she opens the rear door to escort her three screaming kids to the restroom. And it's the same way with relationships. They're like icebergs. And the only 10% you see is the 10% a woman wants you to see. And that's why I made this video, to help you look in the dark corners and under the bed to identify possible problems. Now, I've already warned you about the dangers of dating a woman who's still legally married and all the pitfalls you face when trying to start a relationship with someone in that situation. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about that. I've also warned you about dating Filipinas who have a lot of kids from different fathers, since it not only calls into question her ability to make good decisions, but her apparent inability to settle down with one man. But there's one thing I would like to mention. If you notice that the single mom you're talking to seems to have a man hanging around, and she explains that he's often there because of their child, be suspicious. It could be legitimate, but it's probably not. And here's why. In your culture, it's not unusual to co parent with shared custody, which explains the occasional appearance of an ex. But not here. Once the couple breaks up, there's often little to no input from the father. When a Filipino guy decides to split, he usually disappears like a puff of smoke, rarely to be seen again, in order to avoid providing any kind of support. So if you see another man popping in and out of her house, it's probably not an ex. It's either her husband or a boyfriend. I've also spent a lot of time warning you guys not to send any money, because then you'll never know her true intentions. So I'm not going to spend time talking about that again either. But like with the subject of married women, I want to add a caveat because I think my previous comments might have lacked a little nuance. If her requests for cash are immediate before you've built up any rapport between you, then obviously just block her and move on. But if you've been talking to her a good while, like maybe a couple months, and she brings up a concern about some random one time expense, then that might be different, and it's up to you on how you want to handle it. The majority of Filipinas are gonna be hoping that you'll help them, whether they come right out and ask for it or whether they spend a few months hinting about it. But it doesn't necessarily make them full blown scammers right off the bat. I've always advised that you tell anyone you're talking to right up front that any attempt to get money out of you isn't gonna succeed. But I also understand the reality, and a lot of you guys aren't put off by a request for cash. As long as you don't feel like you're being pressured into it, helping a woman with her problems is your choice. But don't let yourself get guilted or coerced into it. I still don't think it's a good idea, but I know you guys are gonna do it anyway. Now let's get to the meat of the video and talk about some things you might not be paying as much attention to. So, how can you tell if the woman you're dealing with is a rotten apple? Well, let's start with a few online situations. Now, one of the first tactics you'll notice is when a woman immediately wants to move your conversation to another platform, typically WhatsApp. She'll tell you it's more convenient, but in most cases, this should set up a big old red flag. But why? The dating platforms usually are a little clunky, and maybe WhatsApp would be easier. Well, it usually indicates a con game or an attempt to have you pay for a cam show. Even guys who aren't looking for that kind of entertainment can get suckered into it. You know who you are. And it often takes one of two forms. Either she's gonna start taking off her clothes and stop when she gets to the points of interest, at which time she'll ask for cash to continue. Or she's gonna do something even more sinister by asking you to do the same. If a woman you just met online tells you that she's overcome with lust at the thought of seeing your naked body and asks you to do naughty things on camera, beware. That's just not something a typical Filipina does. And not only should it disqualify her from the dating pool, but it puts you at the great risk of sextortion. There are currently whole organizations right here in Southeast Asia that are running this scam. And once they get an X rated video of you doing things your mama warned you about, they'll threaten to actually send it to your mom and your boss and your pastor and your kids, unless you pay them. I'm actually doing a video about it, and it's already resulted in more than a few people ending their lives. That might be the extreme case, but there's another reason the scammer wants to go off site. A lot of dating platforms have conversation logs, and they don't want the request for cash to be documented because they'll get banned from the site. It's also very easy to hack a WhatsApp account by getting you to click on a link she sends you. You can suddenly find a picture of some other guy on your profile as you realize you lost control of your account, and good luck getting it back. By contrast, a quality Filipina will usually be fine with chatting on the original site for at least a few days until she sees that you're for real and figures out what you're looking for. At this stage, be sure to pay careful attention to her photos. Filipinos like to brag through their pictures, whether it's a restaurant they ate at or an exotic place they visited. So, this can give you some good clues as to what she's been up to. If she's been to a fancy resort, she won't be able to resist posting the proof. Now, while a picture like that might seem perfectly normal to you, it raises some questions. Filipinas often go their whole lives without staying at a fancy hotel. We can't afford it. So if she presents herself as a simple provincial woman who's never dated a foreigner, but happened to pose in front of the Eiffel Tower, you know she's got a pass. Someone else took her there, someone took that picture, and someone was staying with her there. Don't think that her friend or her cousin paid for the holiday, because the chances of that are vanishingly small. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a past, but it depends on what kind of past. A woman with a lot of different photos from a lot of high end places either comes from a very wealthy family, she's a tour guide, or she's had a lot of Western boyfriends. Again, that's not necessarily a problem, but you want to be able to match what she says about herself with what you can figure out. Another obvious red flag is a woman's refusal to video chat after you've spent a while texting. If she starts giving you excuses about not having enough load or not enough time or that she's too shy, it's probably more likely that she is a he. You'll also come across women who have the frustrating habit of disappearing right when things are getting good. You might have spent a few days in constant communication, and then suddenly she drops off the grid, only to reappear a few weeks later like nothing happened. Trust me, something happened. And it was probably the other guy or guys she's been talking to. When a Filipina's genuinely interested, she'll laser focus on you, just like I advise you not to do to her. She'll bombard you with texts and pictures and phone calls and make sure she stays in your head. A woman who runs hot and cold simply isn't that interested. You might be thinking that she's playing hard to get, but that's not a game that Filipinas play. For us, it's more like tackle football, and you're the football. For the same reason, it's also a red flag when she doesn't want to hurry the relationship. You don't want to hurry it, but if she doesn't, it's a little unusual. A woman who's playing the field and talking to a lot of different guys doesn't want to close the deal. It benefits her to keep things open ended with all of you. So if the Filipina you're dealing with is constantly slowing things down and acting noncommittal, it's probably a sign that she's either not serious or she's not available, at least not at the present time. Now, some of you ask me what it means when a Filipina won't announce that she's dating you to her friends and family. She should be really excited about telling the whole world, right? But sometimes she does the opposite, which makes you feel like she's hiding something besides your relationship. This sounds like a big red flag, but the truth is, it might not be. If you've been together for a while and she feels like the relationship is legit and has a future, she's more likely to update her status on social media and bring you out of the shadows. But at first, when the relationship is new and untested, you have to understand some of the forces at play in the life of your Filipina that you might not be aware of. Declaring she has a foreign boyfriend immediately creates a whole lot of jealousy from her friends and puts her mom in action, wanting to weigh in with her 2 pesos and asking all kinds of questions about the guy she's talking to. Perhaps worst of all, a Filipina knows she's immediately gonna be asked for money from everyone she ever knew because somehow they assume she suddenly has access to unlimited funds. Old friends and classmates she hasn't talked to in decades will suddenly contact her with their sub stories, each one sticking out their hand. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's also true. So when a Filipina seems a little reluctant to make a big deal about the two of you, don't take it personally. It probably just means she's biding her time until she knows it's for real. But now let's talk about the stuff you're going to encounter once things move offline and you're face to face. And you can look at some of her personal habits. Does she like to dress provocatively, showing a lot of skin? That may be fine with you, and it might be one of the reasons you notice her in the first place. But given the fact that we're from a very conservative culture, if you think she's scantily clad, you can only imagine how we look at her. The same is true about smoking. Now, most of you in this day and age aren't interested in a woman who smokes, and I don't blame you. You'll be happy to know that most of the Philippines is smoke free, in public anyway, and it's relegated to back alleys and hard to find smoking areas. But when a Filipina smokes, it's twice as scandalous because smoking is only common among the men here. It's heavily frowned upon for a woman, so if your Filipina likes to light up, she's already quite a rebel. Just like the revealing attire, that might not bother you, but it's good to know how she compares to the average Filipina. I'm certainly not saying you shouldn't date her, but if she walks around wearing Daisy Dukes while she's popping away on a ciggy, don't believe her when she tells you she's a traditional Filipina that cares what society thinks. Ironically, drinking alcohol isn't one of the signs of a loose woman. Almost every Filipino drinks, both the men and the women. An average Filipina can probably drink you under the table, so unless you're a teetotaler, it's not really a red flag. Another way to tell you're dealing with a Filipina that falls outside the norm is excessive use of makeup. Filipinas don't usually wear a lot of makeup, and if you found one that does, it might mean she's either insecure about her looks or obsessed with them. Now, I've heard you guys say that makeup is another form of deception, equivalent to a guy painting abs on his stomach. And I can understand why you feel that way. After seeing the way some Western women put enough paint on their faces to cover a barn door. But Filipinos aren't usually like that. We often go with the natural look. So if the woman you're interested in doesn't want to be seen without her cosmetics and runs to the bathroom every morning before you wake up so she can put on her face, there might be an underlying issue. Now, here's where I'm probably going to upset some of my Filipina sisters, but what I'm about to say is the truth. We're susceptible to a whole list of personality flaws, and you really need to know what they are so you can spot them. Now, everyone knows about a Filipina's tendency to be crazy jealous. It can cause lots of shouting matches and ridiculous arguments, punctuated by periods of silent tampo. But even if you think it's cute that she's protective of your relationship, it's not really the jealousy that's the problem. It's the insecurity beneath it that can be the real killer. Insecurity means trust issues, and your partner might have trouble believing you're not gonna leave her. An inability to trust also leads to other behaviors like being clingy and needing constant validation to prove you're not thinking of straying. Now, you're the only one that can evaluate her level of insecurity, and it's no easy task. But it can be really tiring when you have to keep reassuring someone at every turn. A lot of Filipinas have also suffered from abuse, both mental and physical. And I don't need to tell you what a toll that can take. I could write a book about all the tragic stuff I've seen and the damage it causes. But suffice it to say that there are a lot of people who have been affected. But not all problems are due to trauma or personality flaws. Some of it's just cultural. For instance, can your Filipina say, "I'm sorry"? Successful relationships are give and take, and when one party always has to be right, it usually means the other one's always wrong. Nothing's more frustrating than someone who won't admit to an obvious error. And I'm afraid you'll find that this is one area where a lot of Filipinas get a failing grade. Some of you might say that's true of all women, that none of us can admit to our mistakes. But trust me, Filipinas are even worse. You might think it's a sign of narcissism, always having to be right, and never admitting our flaws. But it's usually because we're afraid of being wrong. If we admit our guilt, we might get criticized, something a Filipina is taught from birth to avoid. To make things even worse, our desire to avoid responsibility for a mistake can even lead to lying. Now, I've frequently mentioned how Filipinos can have a very distant relationship with the truth, and as a result, some of us prefer to lie rather than to admit we did anything wrong. The bottom line is that you want to keep your eyes open for a Filipina that would rather lie than take responsibility. Because dating a constant fibber is gonna cause all kinds of problems later on. Now, I don't want to leave you with the impression that all Filipinos are messed up. I just want to be honest about our problems so you can decide which women are best to avoid. If a certain model of car has an engineering flaw that causes a predictable set of problems, don't you want to know what they are before you buy one? Just consider me like a Carfax for Filipinas. The good news is that there are plenty of quality Filipinas out there just waiting to make your acquaintance. You just need to carefully check their maintenance history. Well, that's it for this episode, and thanks for watching till the end. Speaking of endings, I reshot my favorite skit of all time, which I put at the end of this video, so I hope you enjoy it. And I'll be back on Friday with something new. Till then, folks.
Approaching Omicron standard orbit, Mr. Painter. Yes, sir.
Planet Omicron, Captain, code 710.
Code 710 means under no circumstances are we to approach that planet. No circumstances whatsoever.
Omicron is home to a species of long-haired, tan-skinned, supposedly irresistible females called Filipinas.
Paradise. We're going in.
Captain, it might be prudent to first consult the video archives of the Filipina P to study their culture, their mating habits, and their propensity to separate men from their resources. Captain? Problems, Captain? Your visit lasted only 3.8 seconds.
A planet of traitors. Disloyal to the core. Rotten like the rest of you subhuman race.
You were conned. I did warn you, Jim. Now promise me you'll never fall for another what? Very wise, Captain. Preparing to leave orbit.
I can leave.
Captain's log, supplemental. The captain has inexplicably returned to the planet's surface. His final transmission was a hysterical, almost incoherent plea for millions of something called pesos.